Hello and welcome to Cuppa with a Scientist, a podcast by Loughborough University that will interview a different scientist each week about their academic journey to the top. We will discuss how they went from a confused teenager choosing A-level subjects or similar to a leader in their field, with plenty of weird and wonderful stories in between and golden nuggets of advice for those aspiring to get into science. As well as keeping your ears and brain entertained, we hope this podcast will dispel the myth that all scientists wear white lab coats and give you an insight into how vast the world of science really is. And because the makers of this show are painfully British, we'll be doing it all over a good cuppa. But before we get started, a quick bit about me, your host. I'm Meg and I'm a PR and Communications Officer at Loughborough University, and I'm also an aspiring scientist. I made the tough decision to return to university and pursue my love of biology, and I found podcasts to be an incredibly helpful resource when making this decision, though I found them to be slightly field specific. From social sciences to health scientists, we'll cover it all in this podcast and show you how vast science really is. And hopefully you'll pick up a few tips along the way and help you on your journey to becoming a scientist. So stick the kettle on and settle in. Joining us for today's episode is Professor Mark Lewis, a Professor of Musculoskeletal Biology and Dean of the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. Mark is also the Director of the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine and the Academic Lead for the National Rehabilitation Centre, a new 70-bed NHS rehabilitation facility near Loughborough. His expertise lies in the design and development of in vitro systems that are similar to human tissue, and the approaches he uses encompasses cell and tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, but more on all of that later. So hi Mark, welcome to the show. First of all, the important question, what mug have you gone for and what are you drinking in it?
So this probably sums up the way I think about things, is I don't have a favourite mug. So basically I just went to a random collection of things which don't match together. And I found this one, which is my, that's Flash Gordon, Queen Flash Gordon mug, only because it, obviously one of the bands I first liked when I was a kid, a few years ago now, and I like the design, and I like sci-fi, so maybe that's why really, but yeah, I don't really have any particular mugs. I just choose the nearest one, which is clean, if I'm honest.
I mean, good tactics. And what are you drinking, tea, coffee?
Tea, always tea. Yeah, nice. Don't drink coffee, always tea.
Mine's not as cool as yours now. Mine seems a bit silly, but I've got my Marie mug from one of my favourite Disney films, Aristocats, and I'm drinking squash because I can't find any almond milk today, so not really Cuppa with a Scientist.
No, not really.
Go.
Also a great film as well, Flash Gordon, if anyone, I think I just said that, so yeah, that's what I was
admit, don't think I've seen it, but I'll add it to the list.
It's very kitschy, but if you like kitsch, it's worth watching.
I'll report back. And we've also requested that you bring an artifact with you, something that kind of relates to your work. What have you got?
So I had a hunt around. I'm not really a collector of stuff either, but I found this chap, or chapess. That is an axolotl. It actually was given to me by a company we're working with called Axolotl Biosciences, and I'll probably talk a little bit about that later on. But the reason that people are interested in this creature, so this is basically part of the salamander family. And the thing about axolotls is they are, because of the water, they live in a very specific part of the world, and there's something very specific about the water they live in. They don't mature. So basically they stay as embryonic creatures. But the reason that they're really interested in the area I work in is people, you can, poor little person, it seems a bit unfair, doesn't it really? But you can, they regenerate their limbs. And so that's what we're particularly interested, part of what we're interested in is regeneration and repair. There are some schools of thought that if you understand how creatures like this or lizards can regenerate lost organs or, lost tails, then that might help us understand how human beings might do it. I don't subscribe necessarily to that school of thought, but fascinating creatures and with that sort of unique ability to be able to regenerate. So axolotl.
Really cool creatures. And I always think they look like real life Pokemon. They're so cute.
Well, I don't know about this. This one's been obviously cutified, which would normally be what I would do to it, but there you go. You can close up the axolotl. There we go.
Brilliant. So let's kind of get stuck into the more serious questions, I suppose. So you're an expert in musculoskeletal biology. Can you explain what that means, please?
Yeah, really simply, it's understanding how the fundamental cell and molecular biology of musculoskeletal tissue. So the musculoskeletal system is basically your muscles, your bones, your ligaments, your tendons, your cartilage, how they work, in the first place. So on a macro level, that's I don't do this work, but obviously we have colleagues in our organisation who work in an area called biomechanics, which is a whole understanding how the whole thing works together. I try to, and I have for many years, try to understand how each tissue works independently, to understand things like hypertrophy, muscle growth, atrophy, muscle loss, and everything in between. So it's my fundamental training is cell and molecular biology. So it's to understand the genetics and the cellular responses of different tissues. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. Fantastic explanation. You've obviously done that before. So it's kind of self-explanatory, I suppose, but for those wondering, why would you say this is an important area to study?
Because it's an important area to study. That's a glib answer. Why? Because your musculoskeletal system is something which literally supports you your entire life. It's something which you need to look after. There's no coincidence that we might talk about it later, I ended up working at the School of Sport Exercise and Health Science at Loughborough University, where it was from previous places. I worked at UCL, University College London, previously. Because understanding how to maintain that musculoskeletal system and how to moderate is really important. So, for example, as people age, actually resistance exercise is actually more important than cardiovascular exercise in terms of being able to get up out of a chair, live an independent life. So that's kind of, that's the one of the answers in terms of the general population. I got interested in it because, like pretty much everyone at Loughborough, I've got a story which is to do with sport, and my sport's rugby union, and I played my entire life and been involved. Injury is prevalent. You just see musculoskeletal injuries all the time. So just very interested, really. So that's kind of how I got into it in the first place. That's kind of the holistic answer. The reason I got into it from a scientist point of view is it's just really, really interesting tissue. So for muscle regenerates, like our friend, the Axolotl here, your muscle regenerates. So when you lose muscle, or when your muscle's being stimulated, and that could be exercising, that could be walking around, you have cells within it which enable new muscle tissue to be grown. And so it is one of the few systems in the human body which is regenerative. And that's also very interesting from, as you can imagine, from a cell biology, molecular biology, science point of view. That's really interesting to understand why it's the case, why it does it, and how it works. So I guess the important thing is kind of, I think it does, like you said, kind of speak for itself. And then it kind of dovetails. You can start with things around people's health, but then you look at loss of limbs. You look at, and maybe the ultimate fantasy is, could we grow new limbs completely, human replacements for people who don't have them.
So we're going to discuss a bit more about your research later on and some of the applications, but I like to take it back a little bit on this show, because the whole point is that we're trying to show kind of that the path to where you are today isn't always straight, it can be winding, and I think it's really refreshing for people to hear. So correct me if I'm wrong, I can't imagine you always wanted to be a musculoskeletal biologist. What did you want to be when you were younger?
Well, sort of, I did, really, in a funny sort of way. I was kind of always, my mum said the question I asked is why the whole time. Why does this do this? Why does that do this? I think people who end up being scientists do it all the time. Mm-hmm. Why is this? Why is that? Why is the other? And I was fascinated by how things worked. And so, tinkering around, taking things like radios and whatnot apart. And I was particularly interested in the human body, really, and how it worked. So my first intention actually was going to do medicine. That was what I was originally going to do. And then one reason or another, things didn't quite pan out as expected. I ended up doing something slightly different. Although ironically, I probably have exactly the same job now as I would have done if I'd followed the other route. I'm sure I would have ended up being a research doctor or medic anyway. So I think I've ended up in the same place, but that's where it came from. So it was just fascination about how stuff worked, particularly the human body. And I kind of, we may get onto the background and things in a second, but I kind of had no influences at all. There's nobody in my immediate family who did anything like this. And so I was just kind of making it up as I went along. So I assumed the only people who studied anatomy, physiology, biochemistry were doctors. I didn't know anyone else could do it. So that was kind of the route I went down. As I say, things didn't quite go according to plan, but I ended up studying biochemistry and physiology instead. And I ended up doing a lot of things I would be interested in, which is kind of the medical sciences side of things, really.
That's really interesting to hear. And I think one of the things we like to try and achieve with this podcast is dispelling the myth of science just being kind of one career. Because it was the same for me at school. I didn't realise how vast science is and just assumed it was, physics, biology, chemistry, that's all you do. There's nothing in between. But you're right, there's loads of different avenues you can explore.
I think it's the integration of all those things, really, which is what's most interesting. And, I was the first in my family to go to university. My dad's a dock worker, worked on the docks, a docker on the south coast. I'm from Poole in Dorset. And my mum was a domestic cleaner. So I didn't have any kind of influences at all, other than probably love sport from my dad. I was lucky that there are lots of people who, you can have debates about this with lots of people, but I went to a state grammar school. I know there's lots of debates grammar school. It was, for me, it was we in our job, in my other bit of my job, we talk all the time about how we how we provide opportunity for people who don't have it. If I hadn't have passed the 11+ exam and gone to a grammar school and found a library and a rugby field, I don't know what, I would have, that was literally completely changed my life. So I think for me, it was, like you said, I was kind of just meandering my way through, not really knowing what you could do, but it came from literally a position of ignorance. It was like there was no other influences to help me go through. So I think you see doctors on telly, right? So you know what they do. So therefore, let's do that.
So let's talk. You said it kind of things didn't go to plan. So can we talk a bit more about that? So what did you study first at university, and where were you? And then how did that kind of progress to where we are today?
This was A levels. I did biology, chemistry, and physics A levels. And I just didn't do well. It's a funny story, and it's quite funny to imagine it these days. But I got to the point where we didn't even have a UCAS then. We actually had separate system for universities. Not everything was university then. And I'd started the process. I'd been offered, I'd gone to the stage where you hold your 2 offers for university in 2 cities. I won't name the city, but when I went to visit it, bearing in mind this was again, I know I don't look it, but it was late 80s. This city was not a place I thought I ever wanted to be. Bear in mind, I was born on the south coast in Bournemouth. France is nearer to my home than London, so it was grim up north, I thought. So ridiculously, I had these 2 offers for the universities, and I dropped one of them, which nobody. That's what I mean. If you'd had any kind of advice or input, there's no way you would have done that. But no, I didn't. No one that gave me any advice or anything. So I just dropped one of the 2. The one I would have got into, actually, as it turned out. And I kept the one that I didn't get into. I didn't get into either, right? But I dropped one of them. So it happened then. It happened at A levels, really. And it was, it's quite funny with my other bits of my job where you talk about clearing and things like that. Well, I know what that feels like. I did it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do the nearest thing I could do to medicine. And so, as I said, there wasn't a lot of expert advice in those days about what decisions to make. And I think basically I was going through, like everyone did, it's all more sort of centralized in computer systems now, but you have to buy the newspaper and go through all the columns to look at all the courses in clearing. And I wanted I thought it's grim up north. I don't think that, but that's what I thought then. And I thought I wanted to stay close to home, so I found a degree in physiology and biochemistry at the University of Reading.
Fantastic. I love hearing how, obviously it was horrible for you at the time, but I love hearing how the people that you would never expect have had these twists and turns to get to these really big roles. So I think it's really refreshing.
Yeah. It wasn't horrible. I didn't know. Horrible suggests you have some kind of expectation or some kind of system setting, but I didn't have anything. So in many ways, it was like, oh well, this is the next thing to do. So I remember being gutted, only because I was annoyed because I wanted to do a bit better at A levels, which would have got me into the only one I had left. It's only looking back over time you think, well, what an idiot! I can't believe you let go the second offer, but it just wouldn't happen nowadays. There'll be 100 people screaming at someone, don't do that, don't do that.
Yeah.
I was just left to my own devices a little bit. So
well, it's all worked out okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So Reading University, so you do the degree there. Did you go on to do a master's, or did you go straight to PhD? I'm just trying to work out how we got to Loughborough.
Yeah. So like many people, when you do a science degree, the first couple of years is bits of it which are really interesting. I kind of enjoyed learning all the biochemical cycles and things like that. But it doesn't always come alive until you do a project. So I did a project in the final year, and I actually it was quite an interesting one actually. You can cut this out if you decide you don't want it in, by the way. I was working in the place I was working at, quite a big animal physiology setup. And the person I ended up doing a project with, again, you don't really know at the time, right? You get a list of things, say, oh, that looks interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They're interested in understanding how stress affects chickens laying eggs, basically.
Oh, okay.
And they were interested in basically neurophysiology. So how the stress axis, so cortisol, affected with the luteinizing hormone and the hormone cycles which are involved with egg production. And so a lot of that happens in the pituitary gland. So basically, and again, I look back now and I kind of laugh, really. I went as a 21-year-old, probably 21, going down to the local abattoir with a big bucket of ice, collecting chicken heads, just with no...
Wow.
Now, maybe in the background, someone had done all the paperwork and I just wasn't aware, and as an undergraduate, you're not aware of lots of things, basically. So I may not have been aware of it. And basically, we you can extract the pituitary gland from the heads, dissect it up, and then grow the cells. So that's kind of where my interest in, I thought, oh, well, this is cool. You can get a tissue and you can take it apart and you can see what makes it up, and then you can rebuild it back together. Then you can use it to understand normal function physiology, abnormal function pathophysiology, and you can use it for drug discovery of pathways, all sorts of really, really cool things. So that's what got me interested in that, and that kind of then led almost back to what we were talking about before about wanting to know how to take things apart and how they're put together and everything. So there you are, literally taking it apart and then understanding how it works. I've started putting them back together again in the last X years, but I'll talk about that in a bit. And I was trying to understand what effect stress hormones, particularly something called ACTH and cortisol, had on the release of FSH and LH, which are hormones involved in egg cycling, basically.
Yeah.
So that was kind of where the interest, I thought, oh, actually, this is quite cool. I like this. I can, actually start measuring things. And it's from there, really. There wasn't really a big culture in my day of doing masters, really, not unless you were retraining almost, or there was an area you wanted to know more about. It wasn't it seems a much more natural progression for a lot of people now. So I went straight to a PhD. So I applied for PhDs in the area of growing cells, basically, cellular molecular biology. And I sort of looked at what came in, and I literally didn't have any bias towards any particular. That's not strictly true. I was quite interested, I thought, in the reproductive system, because it's what I'd done as typical, right? I did it as an undergraduate project, and I thought that was the only thing which was important. So I was looking for things which are in that area, really, although I was pretty open about it. And so then, I applied for a PhD, got interviewed and all sorts of things for it, and then started the PhD. So straight after my undergraduate degree, literally straight in. I finished undergraduate degree, spent the summer, didn't have much cash around, so working all the way through and then going off to do a PhD.
No messing about.
No messing about.
So how did we get from PhD to professor at Loughborough University?
Yeah, so the PhD was, again, really interesting. It was about trying to understand how, when the very primitive embryo is created, so when the cells fuse to make the egg implants into the woman's womb. It's actually called the endometrium. And it was trying to understand how that happens. How does this thing actually glue on? And actually, and again, this fascinated me, burrows in. It actually burrows in. So you have some sort of analogies to pregnancy as sort of alien, carrying, and it literally does. The organism, what becomes the child, burrows its way into the female anatomy, to create the placenta and to create the embryo and the placenta and everything. So what that opened my eyes to, and again, that was quite interesting. Again, you might want to cut this out when I tell you what tissues I collected, but you want to decide if you want me to tell you. But I collect placental tissue. Let's leave it at that. So that again, you're 22 years old and you're going into operating theatres, you're meeting people, you're collecting all sorts of specimens and things. So that was pretty cool, really. And I was doing it I went to London to do my PhD. A place called the Royal Postgraduate Medical School, associated with Hammersmith Hospital. It's now part of Imperial College. And you're right there in the middle of it, collecting samples and doing stuff. So that was pretty cool to be honest with you. And the processes that go on there are the same processes which are involved in, if they're abnormal, in things like cancer. And if they're normal, they're involved in growth. Quite a lot of the fundamental processes are the same. They just are regulated or not regulated appropriately, depending on the situation you're in. So then that led to me from being interested in a particular part of the body, if you like, or a particular process like reproduction, to actually I was much more interested in those events. And as I said, those events transcend any tissues. Lots of little different things in that. So I then looked for a postdoc. I wanted to stay in London. And I saw people who were interested in the molecules and things I was interested in. But actually, it was in the context of kidney disease, where there's a condition called fibrosis. So basically, when your kidneys, it happens with all internal organs, basically, when they're injured or damaged, they get replaced with connective tissue, like it happens on your hand. If you cut your hand and you get a scar, it's an internal scar, basically. And so again, those processes were involved, and what they were doing is what we did was to create an experimental model using cell culture again. So then I was then collecting bits of kidneys at that time, and slicing them up and growing cells and looking at that process as well. So that really drove kind of that interest, and then an opportunity came up. So I did the postdoc. I did it for a couple of years, and like many people who are in that world, you think, okay, well, this is pretty cool, but I've got to do another job now because the contract, it's contract research. So what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I may as well apply for academic roles, like many people do, apply for a variety of roles. And a job came up. Again, it's amazing how it's jumped around. Bear in mind, I've gone from working in sort of related to obstetrics and gynecology to working with nephrology. Now it was in the Eastman Dental Institute at UCL.
Oh, right.
And that was because the people there were interested in how your face grows, because obviously if you don't have straight teeth, you go to see an orthodontist who straighten your teeth, but often that's because of the way your skull has grown and shaping and things. And particularly interesting, this is where it comes in, the muscles and bones of the face, the muscles, bones and ligaments. I hadn't done any work on muscles and bones and ligaments at that point, but what I had done is a lot of work in these underlying systems which were consistent. And as it turned out, those were the systems that that was what I pitched anyway. They were looking for somebody who had knowledge in that area, what you would call matrix biology, I suppose. And so I went along, said, I don't know anything about these systems, but the muscle or bone, but I do know about this stuff, and maybe we can apply it. So I got that job. I then went through senior lecturer reader at UCL. I was there for 93 to 2016 years, and I guess so in that time we'd gone from interest in the muscles and bones, doing cell cultures again, collecting bits of tissue, and then I got involved in what at the time was stimulated by a photograph, which if you go online and look for it, is quite famous, of an ear on a mouse.
Yes, I've seen it.
And that was about almost doing what I'd done in, taking a tissue, creating the cells, then put them back together to recreate the tissue in vitro. So it was functional and it worked like the normal tissue. And I was at the point in my career then where we did a lot of work with cells, but they weren't reconstructed in that way. Thought, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if we can do that with muscles and bones and ligaments and tendons. So I've been working on that for quite a while as part of my, the research bit of my academic career. So we developed these models, and what we can do then, and actually much less well than we could do it now, is grow muscles lab. So what we do is I could take a biopsy from your leg, from your vastus lateralis, this is one of your quadricep muscles. We can isolate the cells and we can recreate your muscle in the lab, basically. And we can exercise it, we can twitch it, we can do anything you like with it. But it's nowhere near as good as it is now. That was, bearing in mind, that was 2008-9. And I guess I was, if I'm honest, I think I was looking for, not for something else to do, but, you know, I've been at UCL for a long time. And I got headhunted actually by Loughborough University to say, would you bring your work and your systems to Loughborough? So it's kind of a combination of, I knew the work we did had a lot of resonance with sport and exercise. I didn't work, although ironically UCL does a huge amount in that area now, but at the time, you know, where would you go? You go to Loughborough, right? It was the obvious place. So I sent an email to a couple of now my colleagues to say, hey, look, I've got these systems. We think it behaves like real muscle, but we'd like to try it out with a few people. We'd like to try a few experiments out. And I always say this to the two colleagues. One of them never replied and the other one did. I remind them of this, the one who didn't reply when I see them. And I got asked up to do like a little research seminar thing. And off the back of that, I got offered, you know, what I think it was called Star Professor then, but like the Excellence 100 type stuff, to come and join Loughborough University. So that's kind of how it happened. So it really came on the back of that work that I spent many years doing. On the side, I've done quite a lot of leadership roles and other things as well. So that obviously, you know, as you imagine, when you come in at a senior level, I came in as a prof, basically. There's lots of other things that people look at, not just that. But that was one of the main drivers. So that's kind of hand up at Loughborough.
So let's jump to a bit more to present day. So you're at Loughborough. What does your day-to-day / typical month, if there is one, what does that look like for you?
Lots of meetings. I'm not someone who, you know, everyone has slightly different styles. I like people and I like talking to people. So I'd always much rather talk to somebody about something rather than send an email or whatever. I mean, I've always had a mantra that I don't mind sending good news by email, but I always want to give the bad news or news that might be perceived as bad personally. So, you know, if something's been unsuccessful or whatever, you know, I'd much rather tell people personally.
Yeah.
Because of my role as a dean, obviously I'm on the academic leadership team of the university, so there's a lot of university level things. So lots of meetings. I don't really have many minutes in the day where I just sit in an office or sit doing things myself. I haven't worked in the lab for over a decade, obviously, because once you get to a position, you write grants and things to pull people into work for you and do that. So yeah, that's always nice days. Nominally, I do my dean's role 4 days a week, and I do that 1 day a week, but of course they all kind of bleed into each other. But the advantage is you just get to meet lots of different people. I think that's the thing I would say. It's not the same meeting with the same people about the same things. You know, I particularly enjoy the strategic side of things and think about where we're going to go and plot the future, as it were, and work towards that, both in the big level as my job as a dean, but also in terms of, you know, still the research and the things I'm involved in now.
So let's talk about your research now. So first of all, can you tell us about the upcoming National Rehabilitation Centre, please, and what your involvement in this project is?
Yeah, of course. Quite a long story, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So the UK military, so that's all the forces together, do all of their medical stuff together. And they had a rehabilitation centre. So when someone's been injured, you know, rehabilitation post-injury to get back to full service, in a place called Headley Court near Epsom in Surrey. They were supported philanthropically, if you like, by the Duke of Westminster. The previous Duke of Westminster, unfortunately, died a few years ago, and now his son. To, you know, be careful what you wish for, right? The people down there said, well, we haven't got much space. You know, we're in Marine Belt. We can't really expand. It's quite difficult. And at the time, that would have been at the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And there's some really interesting which took out of that, actually, that which I've seen working on this project. That the sort of events and things, it's all going to get a bit serious, I'm afraid. These are the sort of things which would have someone been put in a body bag. They actually survive now. You know, things have moved on so well. The sort of combat medicine and things have moved on so well that injuries which would have killed someone in the past they survived from. But what it did mean is that people are coming back with quite complex rehabilitation needs, often involving prosthetics and additional supports and what have you. So there was felt to be that the Headley Court wasn't future proofed. So the Duke of Westminster said, right, well, what I want to do is I want to build a new one, basically establish a new Defence Medical Rehabilitation Centre, the DMRC. I'll come on to the NRC in a sec. And what he did, and quite just makes your mind boggle really, is that the defence complex is about £350 million, I think it was. What they did is they bought the land. So they did a survey to find out, well, what's the best place to have it, and the best, and I'm sure you know this yourself, but where we are in Loughborough, etc., we're not very far from the geographical centre of the UK. So being in the centre is not a bad idea. It's just as hard or just as easy for anybody to get anywhere. So that was number one. It had to be less than an hour from Birmingham by road, because you may not be aware, but the main trauma centre for the military is in Birmingham. So if people were flown back in who were injured, they'd be treated in Birmingham for the primary injuries, and then they'd go to a rehabilitation centre. And they happened upon the site of a place called Stamford Hall. Stamford Hall is, for the people who don't know listening, is 4 miles from the Loughborough University campus, heading towards, it's actually got a Loughborough postcode and address, but it's in Nottinghamshire, and it's right on the Nottinghamshire-Leicestershire border. So what he said was, okay, if we can establish this centre, I want two things from the government, and of course, he had the connections to talk directly to the government, say two things. I'd like the MOD to move its funding from Headley Court to Stamford Hall, kind of obvious. And then secondly, I'd like the government to commit to a national rehabilitation centre alongside. So about 3 or 4 years ago, the Chancellor of Exchequer announced that there had been money put aside, £90 million for the National Rehabilitation Centre. And that's one of the things that, again, I've learned in the areas I work in. If you lose a limb, it would be great if you could just grow one back like Axolotl here. That there's a lot learned from combat and sport, actually, which translates into general public. And so having them juxtapositioned next to each other, juxtaposed, I should say, was the ambition. So the Defence and Medical Rehabilitation Centre has been open for about three years. I think they opened and COVID happened. And at the moment, I'm now on the national board to establish a National Rehabilitation Centre. So that's going to be, I think it's now gone up to over £100 million development, which will sit a few hundred metres from the Defence Medical Rehabilitation Centre. What it will do really is completely revolutionise rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is a funny area really, because it means something to everybody, but it never means the same thing to everybody. Right. And really what, I see it as a rehabilitation is if you have any major life event, now that could be a car accident, but that could be being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. There's always a rehabilitation process. So it could be mental health, mental illness, where people need to rehabilitate. And so obviously, so often the best way to deal with these things is for it not to happen in the first place. So prehabilitation, that can be important in some areas. So, prehabilitation for type 2 diabetes would be around lifestyle choices, for example. Right, yeah. And also in rehabilitation about, and then the cool science fiction things like exoskeletons and things like that for people to wear as our sci-fi films and what have you, for that kind of end of it. So what it's really done is it's kind of rehabilitation research was always kind of rehabilitation more generally is always kind of seen as old people's homes and Zimmer frames. And actually, it's way, way, way more than that. And it encompasses a whole range of disciplines. That's the other thing as well. So lots of health and medical disciplines, engineering, biological sciences. It's really, really broad. So, that's what it'll be there for. It will have people in it. So there'll be people treated in it. So one of our project partners is clearly the NHS. So there will be people treated in it, but there'll also be people going there for the community of people. Like if you have any centre of excellence, it's got to be a world-leading centre of excellence, where clearly it was really exciting. Loughborough, we are one of the main drivers of the project. And I remember actually when 2012, quite soon after I started, and I became dean within about 6 or 7 months. I went with Bob Allison to the site, put our wellies on, and splodged around in the mud up there to be involved. So we've been involved as an institution, and I personally been involved since 2012, 2013, fairly early on. We've done a lot of support of the defence side, as I've talked about, and now we're pivotal players in the National Rehabilitation Centre. So yeah, our involvement is large. I lead that involvement for the institution. Clearly, I try and make it as broad as possible, so as many parts of the institution to be involved as possible. And it's absolutely going to be world leading and transformational. There's just no two ways about it.
What a brilliant project to be part of and to be, leading on as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's really cool.
You kind of mentioned that the research before in rehabilitation is kind of a bit more focused towards elderly people. In your opinion, do you think research in rehabilitation has been overlooked a little bit? And have you kind of outlined some research outcomes that you'd like to achieve at the centre? So
I think, has it been overlooked? I think it's the word and the definition of the word and what does it mean for people. And some of it has just been putting lots of things which would have lived in different homes before into one home. So for example, you might have colleagues. So we've got colleagues in design and creative arts who are interested in 3D printing prosthetics and things like that. Would they have ever worked with people who are looking at diet and physical activity as a prevention strategy for major life events? Probably not. Well, they might want in our institution, but not on a national and international level. So when I say overlooked, I think it's, again, the point I was making really is that people silo it in their own minds. So I think quite a lot of what we're doing is saying to people it's really, really, really broad. So we've got 6 research areas. 3 are technology driven and 3 are sort of application. And the application is prehabilitation, acute rehabilitation, and chronic rehabilitation. So stopping it happening in the first place, if you like, or making steps so if it does happen, the consequences are not as great, for want of a better word. Acute rehabilitation, which is when something has just happened, what do you do then? And then long-term rehabilitation. And we have a number of, so for example, you might want to, just thinking of projects we've got in those areas. So wearable technology is obviously really important in this area. You're probably aware that we do quite a bit of work in the institution in this area. So if you could devise, devices and phone things and apps and stuff which can help people do the right thing. So if anything does happen to them, one of the things we learned from COVID-19 is a really good example of something people wouldn't normally think about as rehabilitation. But actually, we know that the people who were physically better prepared for COVID-19 weren't affected so badly. So people who were healthier, and I'm using that term, and it can be defined in lots of different ways, but people who were healthier were much better able to deal with the condition. But there have been some people who've got long COVID, so people who require long-term rehabilitation. So I think it's about broadening. It can encompass almost any area of health. So I think it's about health. It's about maintaining good health, really. And then when something pushes that off course, finding a way to get it right back on course as quickly as possible. So for me, I think the breadth, I think the overlook that is the simplistic way that people talk about it. But I've learned since being involved in this project that I've been involved in rehabilitation research my entire career. I just didn't call it that.
Right, got you.
And I think it's putting things together, but also, and it's, you'll be careful when you use like words which are, you're working with people who've got no legs, but it's cool. But it is cool. You get involved in really important things, but really, really interesting. Again, I'm going to bring Axel back into it again. Understanding how regeneration and repair works, so you could maybe, I say science fiction perhaps, but grow a new limb for a human being is really, really exciting. And so you've got that very sort of sci-fi, many years down the line stuff, but you've also got the very practical things of, apps for people to interact with experts to be able to help their short-term rehabilitation as well. And that's what's kind of cool about it, is it's really broad, very multidisciplinary, as I've already said. So no, I for me, it's not so much overlooked as not everything's all been in the same place and everyone's not been talking the same language. And that's the other thing about the National Rehabilitation Centre. It's a place where everyone's come and talk about the same. They may talk about it in their own language, the UN almost, right? They may talk about it in their own language, but they're coming under a banner of a single thing.
Connecting all those dots, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think also you have to bear in mind that we live in a world now where, particularly in places like the United Kingdom, people are living longer. So there are lots of conditions where, it wouldn't, frankly, it wouldn't have mattered because people were dying younger. Now people are living so much longer. I think that be able to live a long, healthy, and productive life is really what it's about. From a sort of a mental and physical health point of view, that's really what it's about.
Well, I really look forward to seeing how the centre progresses. It sounds like it's going to have some massive impacts all over the place, which is brilliant. So let's kind of pivot to another one of your research areas. So I know it's listed on your academic page as some of the research you work on is the design and development of in vitro systems that are as much like the actual tissue as possible. Could you explain to our listeners who may not even know what in vitro means, what this kind of research entails?
Obviously, you can look at your own body. You can see your muscles, right? You can see your bones. You can see the tissues of your body. What's going on inside those? What's going on inside you when things happen? There are when you're sort of living your life normally, just all the things I've talked about. So there are ways you can collect samples. You can take a biopsy of a muscle, for example. You can put people in MRI. There's stuff you can do. Well, that doesn't really tell you about what's going on inside of those tissues themselves, the biological pathways. And understanding the biological pathways often help you make the best interventions. The best ways of understanding happens are how you can help it. And as I talked about earlier, what in vitro means actually means in glass. That's what it technically means. But it means growing cells in a laboratory on a petri dish, essentially. So I talked about yourself earlier. We could take a biopsy of your vastus lateralis, one of the muscles in your leg, and we can extract the cells from it and we can grow them, and then we can put them back together to make a functioning muscle. So when I said as much like the actual tissue possible, it's that so when that little bit of muscle's in the lab, it's behaving just like your muscle does. You can exercise it and it fatigues. You can feed it and it grows. All of those things which you would do with your normal muscle, it happens in vitro. And that really is kind of there are terms that people use like regenerative medicine, tissue engineering. It's those sort of tissue engineering is the best word, really. It's rebuilding a tissue so it behaves exactly like it does in your body, which sounds really, really straightforward. And it sounded really straightforward to me at the beginning. Then you realize it really isn't straightforward at all, because of course what you're doing is you're isolating from, your muscle tissues are connected together to the rest of your skeleton, which are in your body. So everything's connected together. So there's always, bits and pieces you need to add back in to make them behave. So that's what we do, really. And I suppose over the years, I really, ended up working in the musculoskeletal system, so muscle. So that's the main thing. And I say we're one of the most cited groups in the world, actually. And again, I'm not trying to be a braggart about it, just we've done quite well at it. And so we can do that really reproducibly over and over again. And you have to build, if you look at anybody's muscle there, it's attached at two ends, right? And it pulls against the two ends. Now, what it might do is pull your arm up. That's how your muscle works. So having it attached at two ends is really important. Well, already you've added a level of complexity there, because this is a collection of cells which are put into the right format and held between two pins, if you like. Well, how do you make those pins? What do you do with them? How do you measure the force? So this is a really good example of where the multidisciplinarity comes in. We 3D print the pins, basically. So this is a collaboration that we've had with Design and Creative Arts and actually some parts of Wolfson and Acme as well, to 3D print not the biology, but the supporting structures, the artificial tendons, if you like, to do that. So quite some of the research is in the just making that better. So we've done some really cool things. This project I started when I was at UCL and carried on here at Loughborough is, can we make a neuromuscular junction? i.e. can we plumb nerves in? So we can make, you're probably aware that your nerves obviously drive your muscles to move. But then if something happens to your muscles, they send a signal back again. So we can actually grow nerves from stem cells and put those in as well. Adding the blood system, adding the complexity of adding to both. So that continues. That's a continual process. And the better that gets, obviously we can start thinking about transplanting it. Again, picking up my prop again. I didn't think I was going to use it. I've used it loads. Could we grow enough tissue to make a limb, for example? And and then to use it for things. So over the years, we've worked with the institution. Loughborough University had a relationship with PepsiCo, Gatorade. So could we use these models to understand which supplements might make muscle get bigger, hypertrophy? When you have been injured, you are inactive and your muscles shrink, they atrophy. So models to kind of understand that. And then actually doing some quite cool things to understand injury and then rehabilitation. We've just literally been funded for £800,000. It's £1 million project actually, with an organisation called the National Centre for Reduction, Refinement, and Replacement of Animals, NC3Rs. They are a UK research agency basically, who are linked or part of the MRC, Medical Research Council, but also funded by some funding from the British pharmaceutical industry as well, to try and replace animals. Because the one thing about the things I'm interested in, like I said to you before, you can't have experiments where you have everyone the same, then you injure someone and see what happens and you don't injure the other group. You can't have it. Injury is always looked at post the event. And of course, once your ACL, your anterior cruciate ligaments exploded, it's exploded. There's nothing, you're only learning about what the broken tissue looks like. We want to know what happens as you get to that point. So we've got some really interesting work going on about some of the work around acoustic injury, shock waves, particularly post sort of explosions. Mechanical injury overload. One of my PhDs is Jess Judd. Jess, you should talk to Jess actually, because she competed in the Olympics in Tokyo for Great Britain in 10,000 and 5,000 meters, and she's interested in overload injury. She's an athlete, she's interested in overload. So how does that? But you can never really study it before you have our systems. Chemical injury, there are various ways that you can damage the tissue. How does it repair? So down that route. And then of course there is the other route, which is a little bit about growing replacement tissue, or even understanding how the juxtaposition of tissue you might grow might interact with something like a prosthetic limb, and how they can work together as well. So lots of over the years, huge number. I think I've supervised 50 plus PhDs over the years.
Wow,
something like that. We have, we've had a good purple patch since we've been at Loughborough getting funding. So that's, I would say it's lucky because we do really good work, but it's been great that we'll be able to maintain that, because that's really very difficult to do. So very grateful to all the people who've worked on the projects and all the funders who've supported us as well, because that's been a real great thing. And I'm just trying to think of all the current projects, and then now we can injure them and then rehabilitate them. So we can get these muscles, we can injure them, and then we can understand what regimes you can rehabilitate. And then we can go straight back to the human beings who do this and say, hey, we think that you should be overloading the tissue by X amount. Can you translate that into a clinical intervention or a chemical intervention or a prevention strategy? So we really want it all links back into real life. I think that's the point. And it's kind of nice because it's very applied research, but actually it's quite blue skies as well, because what you're doing is trying to understand fundamental, you said yourself about your interest in biology. You're trying to understand fundamental biological processes, but with an application. So it's kind of cool because NASA use a term, technology readiness levels, TRL 1 to 9. And 1 is like discovery, and 9 is a spaceship landing on the moon or whatever. And it's really cool because our work really spans across those TRLs.
That's really interesting. How do you juggle it all? Because we've done a lot of talking today and it's a lot of work. So how do you kind of stay on top of everything?
Well, I have a brain which works in a certain way. We may touch on that in a second. Be really interested. I think that helps, to be quite honest with you. Have worked with great people. I mean, the honest answer is work with great people all the time, because you can't deliver stuff on your own. Very few people. I mean, I learned that because the area I've worked in, I hope it's been clear throughout the chat we've had. It relies on lots of different people and lots of different expertise. So you do rely on lots of different people. So you have to, and honestly, I mean, I've had conversations about some I work with people who coach national sporting teams and people who train military personnel to people who work in some of the most intricate and most precise molecular biology. So it's really having good teams. I think having good teams is the answer, really. And then you let people get on with it, right? I think that's the important stuff for me.
Yeah, I can imagine it's very rewarding to see all your 50 plus PhD students go out into the world and make a difference as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's nice that, but what I guess what you want to give to people is, we like to work hard and play hard as well. So, we try and make it fun. I think that's really important. It should be enjoyable. People don't get on with everybody, right? That's the fantasy world. But you can put things in place to make people enjoy their day-to-day life as much as possible. And you try and make it that people enjoy what they're doing. I don't, if things don't work, I'm not really worried. If people make mistakes, I'm not really worried. I get more worried when people say they're not enjoying it or they're not motivated. That bothers me more because that's an environment thing. People cock up, things go wrong. That's just life. And in fact, you learn way more from the mistakes. Again, another cliche you probably heard loads of times on these, but you do, for everyone listening, make mistakes. It's important to make mistakes because that's the only way you learn how to do the next thing better. And I do worry that we've generated a bit of a culture that everybody wants, instant success and everything to work straight away. And actually, if I gave you a list, you've got a list, you said about the long list of things that I've got which have been successful. I should show you the list of the unsuccessful things, because if that's the success is a few pages, the unsuccess is about 3 novels worth. So, it's you just don't talk about those things, right? Because they're part and parcel of the process.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I did an experiment recently for a module and basically found nothing.
Yeah.
But the best coursework mark I've ever received. So,
And actually, if you set your experiment up properly, so I'm quite a big one about design of experiments, get the experimental design right first time. Because one, with the hat I wear now, it saves money, so you don't waste things. But also, it's good science, because if you're asking the right question, you can design relatively, a lot of cell culture experiments are actually relatively simple. The techniques and things you need to learn, and that's complicated, but the actual experiments themselves are quite simple. And that's good science for me, because you're asking, your null hypothesis is simple, and you're asking the right question. So if your experiment has been set up well, but it just doesn't work, that's brilliant, because that tells you a nil answer isn't unsuccessful.
Exactly.
Sometimes things don't work because people drop them on the floor or drop them in the sink or
different story.
Or whatever. But that's something, that's just human. That's just humans.
Yeah.
But actually, well-designed experiments which don't work, and I don't agree with the word "don't work." In fact, the tissue might be working really hard to not change. You might be treating it with something and you say, well, nothing's happened, but actually that tissue is working really, really, really hard. Your tissues in your body are working really, really hard all the time to stay in the homeostasis, essentially. So I think it's important to try things. Actually, that's the important thing, is to try things, really.
Very good advice. So you kind of touched on it a little bit there. So you did a blog post recently, I believe, called 2 Parallels. Could you tell our listeners a bit about what you wrote about in this blog and why you decided to share, please?
Yeah. So I think it's about ADD. Actually, although I don't like it when people say, "Oh, you've got ADD." No, I haven't. I've not got. It's like saying, "What's it like being a scientist with blue eyes?" It's not a question you'd ask anyone, and I've not got a disease. It's not nothing. It's me. It's just part of my makeup. It was my own son, actually, who was having some struggles, and of course, the support mechanisms these days are way better than when I was younger. Way more. People are more aware of things. Perhaps they're not as aware as they should be, but they are more aware. They tend to really concentrate only on children in this area, and in fact, it's very obvious that the people who don't sort of work on strategies when they're younger, they just find their own strategies. I remember I talked to someone about this, and they said, well, there are 2 types of people with ADD. There's people with high IQ and low IQ, and the high IQ people go on to be people like Richard Branson, super successful, loads of ideas, like, oh my god, this mad scientist almost. And the unsuccessful people end up in prison. So I thought it was a little bit unfair, but it really is that kind of that side of it. So it was really supporting my son, to be honest. That was the reason I did it. But then when I heard about the things he was talking about, I thought, that's me. And part of the diagnostic test is that you get your people who've known you for a long time, people who've just known you, they all kind of give answers to a survey, and that's all then cross-connected, and you get a diagnosis, essentially. So it said that I found out that I was somebody who was ADD, or had the way my brain was wired was in that characteristic set. And I think the reason, so why did I do it? My brain works in a certain way. which I'm really proud of, by the way. And actually, I don't think it's ADD hasn't caused me any problems in my academic career. In fact, if anything, it's totally enhanced it. If you read the blog post, you'll see there's a little list I did of the sort of things, and it's people who want 15 different things going at once. So let's try this, let's try that. And I actually think it makes people, I think it's the people who are like that are the ones who come up with lots of brilliant ideas and, you know, and come up with the off the wall stuff usually and say, yeah, let's just try it. So I think in terms of my academic career, I think it's been a positive 100%. Well, it isn't anything, it is me. So I'm always, one of the reasons I wanted to write it is I wanted to kind of disperse the notion that you have something, that, you know, that you're ill almost, that something I've been diagnosed with. No, I'm just Mark Lewis. Mark Lewis happens to be wired this way, and this is the way his brain works. And just to sort of almost to appeal to people to be a little bit more tolerant of other people. I do things in some ways that other people wouldn't do it, like we all do. And so therefore, the example I gave in the blog is that I like to have my diary full all the time because that helps me organize my brain, basically. And so people say, oh, we can't ever you're always busy. And I say, yeah, but I'll always change things and move things around. So don't assume because it's that way that the other things don't happen. So it's just a little bit more about understanding of other people. So that's why I did it. I wanted people to understand that it really isn't a sob story. I didn't do it for any reason other than I wanted to just to you know, talk about it. And actually the reason was as well is I'm the ALT, academic leadership. We have an academic leadership team where all the senior leaders of the university meet to run the university, essentially. I'm the academic champion for the inclusion group. And I kind of, nobody knew why I wanted to do it, but I knew I wanted to do it. I've also very, very close friends. Up until the age of 18, I'd be the legal guardian of a boy who's got Down syndrome. And some of the things he had to deal with are just bloody shocking in society, just the challenges of just getting things done. Kid's a bloody superstar. So, you know, it's kind of things like that which made me want to try and bring it. So it's about, you know, people just being, if someone does something a certain way, they're not doing it to try and wind you up. They're not trying to do it to annoy you. They're doing something which helps them work through. So I think I did it for as an awareness piece, really. And I said to the group I was going to do it as well, so I kind of had to as well. Emma Nadine, who runs the inclusion group, is absolutely brilliant, and she said to me, well, you should write about it. And I wasn't sure, and I thought, well, this is just, sometimes the bits of you which are you want to keep for yourself, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But actually I thought it was kind of a nice story, because for me, I'm not, as I say, someone would ask, how do you do your career with blue eyes? You know, it's just how my brain is wired, and I think it makes me really successful. Actually, some of the other parts of ADD, the brain racing all the time, that's sometimes where you get some of the other effects. You know, it can be linked to mild to moderate depression, because if your brain's racing all the time, you're wanting to do things all the time and something new all the time, and you just can't. It's just not feasible. And often it's the sort of relaxing your brain, which is the issue. And then sometimes that can lead to you just feeling a bit down because you think, well, I want to do this and I want to do that, and there's the real world, and then there's the world that my brain lives in sometimes, and you want to do everything. So I guess I wanted to do it for awareness. I did it to support my son, and I thought it was important to say that. And I just wanted to, you know, make the point that we're all wired differently. That's what makes the human race great, right? I think I hate the word neurodiversity because it makes it something medical and biological and a problem. I like the word diversity. And I don't like the word disability. I like the word ability. So what do you have? You have diverse abilities. Well, that's called being human beings. I think just recognizing that and helping people thrive. So awareness. I think I did it for awareness. That's the main reason. So
I think it's a really interesting and honest read. And when we release this podcast, I'll definitely make sure we hyperlink it, because I think a lot of people will be, I think they will. I think sometimes with talking about things like this within HE, I think some academics, I even spoke to somebody today, they worry that how institutes will perceive that. So I think it's great 100%. That as a dean, you've come out and said it. I think it's fantastic.
I'm a white male dean as well. So, you know, which aren't a group of people who would normally step up and talk about this stuff. But it didn't, I've had loads of lovely messages, and thank you everyone if anyone's listening for that, because I'm really touched by them. So many people have contacted me who I didn't know, some of them from around the university, thanking me for doing it. And And they use the word brave, and I know, and I'm not dismissing what they've said to me, but I just don't think it is brave. I'm just talking about me.
Honest. That's the word I'd use. It's
and being honest is the important thing. And you're right. One of the things that the inclusion group are really keen on. We do a lot around this for students, but it's important we do it for staff as well.
Absolutely.
But that's the group of people I kind of represent, or work with, I should say, not represent. It's really about just understand that everybody's different. I think that is as simple as that, really. And don't judge. I think people worry about being judged, as you've said, and it actually, it's shocking, really. Again, I think it goes back to Victorian concepts of normality and what is normal. I can tell you I'm abnormal according to the airlines, because I'm 6'4", and I can't sit in any of the seats because they're for a normal height person. This is what I mean. There's these concepts of normality which don't really exist, and which were made to for various reasons in the past. So I think it's just about accepting that everyone's different, right? And I think you learn a lot about people, and you find out a lot about different people in their lives, and how many different ways there are of working at Loughborough University, actually. So I think that's why I did it, really. I just wanted to talk about it, really, and I promised some of the people I were going to do it, so it was a little bit of push as well.
No, I think it's great that you have. To finish off, we're going to do a bit of a quick fire question round, just because we've been chatting for a while, which I absolutely love, but I'm sure our listeners probably don't want a 4-hour podcast. So we'll do a bit of a quick fire round.
I can talk a high leg off a donkey, don't worry, for hours.
So can I, and also because you're in the biology field, both of us together, we could be here all evening. So quick fire, what's the most exciting thing about your role?
The different people I deal with and the different projects, and the breadth of the projects I get involved in.
The not so glamorous parts? Oh, big silence.
Yeah, because
good though.
The day-to-day grind of any job which you've been doing for a long time, which is the same of all work. I mustn't pretend that it's all Harry Potter and we're all wizards and it's all great every single day. There are just some days which are just a bit dull and a bit grinding. I think that's the same with most people's work, really.
Favorite project to date?
Oh, that is a really, really hard one. I think probably when we got I'll give you two answers, actually. The first one is about the research, and that's when for the first time we were getting muscles to twitch in the laboratory and behaving like a real muscle. That's a pretty big moment because we've been working towards it for a long time. In terms of my favorite project today in the other role, it's probably the National Centre of Sport and Exercise Medicine, which was a 2012 Olympic legacy to improve the nation's health through sport, exercise and physical activity, which I kind of, when I got brought in as a prof, you kind of need leadership roles. And that was one of the things I was going to do. I wasn't, as I say, I became the dean after that. So that's probably the favorite today. The NRC and will take over that, definitely, the DMRC, but that's been my favorite to date,
So you've obviously achieved a lot, but what is your dream or future goal for your career?
God, I don't have the slightest idea. I actually don't have the slightest idea. It's very interesting. An academic career is very has lots of steps in it. Has a very clear progression in it, from PhD to postdoc or whatever, teaching assistant, whatever, to lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, prof, and you have that for 15, 20 years of your career. All of a sudden you don't have it anymore. And it's very, very weird, actually, because you kind of go onto that point. So I'll keep enjoying it.
Good, that's a good answer.
That's my answer.
Chase what interests you and what's enjoyable.
Yeah.
What do you do in your spare time? Are you still doing rugby?
I still run around while I stand on a rugby field. So I still do that. It's very lucky. I'm very fortunate I can play with my sons as well now. So that's nice. That's probably my main sort of stuff outside work. What else do we do? I'm a social beast. I like socializing. So you'll always find me organizing, trips to the pub or the theatre or go to watch sport. I like people. So things which involve being around other people. I'm terrible. If I'm on the house on my own, I hate it. I'm just not somebody who likes being on my own. If I'm honest, I don't really like my own company in a kind of a positive way. So being around other people and doing stuff, which kind of fits with all the things we talked about, I think.
Absolutely. And then just looking forwards a bit, so we've kind of covered past, present, let's go to future. For the next generation of scientists kind of stepping into your field, what do you think will be the next hot topics for them?
For me, I think it will be how can you make lots of a tissue? So why is that important? Well, again, the prop I was never going to use. If I want to make a leg, I need bones and muscles and ligaments and tendons, and I need to grow that. That's as much an engineering and processing technology challenge as it is about a biological challenge. And not only that, there's another world that you're probably quite aware of, or maybe the listeners are, I don't know, about clean meat. So about growing. So what we do in the lab is we grow muscle. A steak is muscle. So we've now having more and more involvement with people who are trying to grow meat in the laboratory, basically growing meat. It's just muscle, which they eat. And that again is going to be limited by how much you can make, not can you do it. The technology, we're pretty much there. So I think for me, that's going to be the hot topics, is being able to literally replace farm animals with laboratory grown meat and be able to completely regrow an entire new limb to give back to somebody.
Wow, well, that's fascinating. Watch this space.
Yeah, well, it won't happen in my lifetime, but who knows? Who knows?
And final question. So for people listening that are kind of aspiring to be like you and work in kind of your industry, do you have any words of wisdom, or alternatively words of wisdom your younger self would have liked to have heard?
Pursue things which interest you. And now I understand that those people say that, and that can be very trite because we've got, like you alluded to earlier, people have got mortgages to pay and mouths to feed and all that kind of stuff. So it's not always straightforward, but wherever you can, I think I would follow what interests you, but don't follow it blindly. So there are some people who say, oh, I'm really interested in, like my example I always use is the physiology of camels or something. But if the rest of the world are not interested in the physiology of camels, then you kind of got to moderate yourself a little bit. So it is follow what you're interested in and things which get you excited. Just be aware that, you know, to sustain it, you need other people to be interested in it as well.
Got you. That's good advice. Try to combine those two words, loves and a real world issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today and Cuppa with the Scientist. I've had an absolute blast hearing about your research. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to plug website-wise, Twitter-wise, anything like that you want people to check out?
I'm terrible at stuff like this. I've got people to do it for me now, which is great. I guess look at the NRC. I mean, it's a major. I mean, it just isn't Mark Lewis project. This is something I'm doing on behalf of the whole institution and part of the UK. So I think that's a really important thing. It's hugely significant for us because of how close it is to us, and it's hugely significant for many things that we talk about. So yeah, go away. Maybe maybe I can send you a few links and bits and pieces, and we can, you know, lots of things, and talk about the stuff. Go out and talk about the stuff. And I guess the other thing is just, you know, read the blog a little bit and just reflect on, you know, perhaps if someone's behaving in a certain way and it's annoying you, just maybe consider they're not doing it to annoy you. Yeah. They're doing it because that's how they get through their life, and maybe bear that in mind as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Mark. We'll pop all the links below in the YouTube description. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely brilliant. I've enjoyed talking to you thoroughly. Great fun. Thank you very much. It's got very dark as I've been talking to you. I think I've got more and more feeling in the dark, which is a familiar sort of feeling. So yeah, quite appropriate.
Thank you all for listening and watching this episode of Cuppa with the Scientist. I hope you find it interesting and will join us again soon. Do leave a comment and get in touch. I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on who you'd like to see on the show. And make sure you don't miss a show by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other mainstream podcast platforms. You can also subscribe to the Loughborough University YouTube channel if you prefer to watch the show. See you next time for more hot tea and even hotter stories to help you on your way to becoming a scientist.